Wow. Miss Jasmine, we're ready to start.
Very nice.
I'm honored.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for coming to this special book launch. It is my pleasure and honor to introduce you to our author, Alison R. Alison grew up in England, moved to Israel, and then to Philadelphia. She also lived in Mexico and California. She's a graduate of Hebrew University and Bryn Mawr College, one of the original Seven Sister Colleges. In Philadelphia. Alison worked for many years as a clinical social worker and then as clinical director for a variety of nonprofits, including Jewish Family Services and the University of California. She has published numerous articles and chapters on feminism and mental health. This afternoon we have a plan. It goes like this. Alison is going to read an excerpt from Devoted. Then I will ask her some questions, and then we will open the floor up to your questions. Be assured, we will leave plenty of time for you to buy books and have them signed.
Yes. They take plastic. So this is an excerpt from the end of the first chapter of Devoted. Ashley receives a call from JP, who is her sister Lizzie's wife, telling her that Lizzie is in hospital dying. Ash jumps on a plane and comes to Philly, where JP picks her up and takes her to the hospital. JP drops her off and goes to park the car, while Ash rushes to her sister's side. So now what I'm going to ask you to do, if I get too quiet or I read too quickly, start waving your arms around, and I'll notice, okay? I run through the double doors and follow the signs to the elevators. A desultory group of people is waiting, and now that I'm so close, I'm too desperate to see Lizzie to wait. I push open the small door next to the elevators, take the stairs two at a time, pull open a heavy door onto the second floor, and head towards the nurse's station. A plump, middle-aged woman whose afro frames her face like a halo asks how she can help me. When I tell her who I am, she looks relieved and hurries me down the hall. Inside Lizzie's room, it's hard to believe that the woman propped up in the hospital bed is my sister. Her skin is yellow, and she's so bloated she reminds me of one of those blimps that hover in the sky, encouraging me to buy their brand of beer or insurance. An oxygen mask covers her nose and mouth, and an IV snakes itself around her arm. Her eyes are closed. I tiptoe over and stand at the bedside. "Lizzie?" I whisper, and stroke her swollen fingers. "Lizzie?" I don't know if she can hear me, so I take a chance and say loudly, "It's me, Ash, your sister." Her lids flutter, and for a moment she opens her eyes. Her gaze is blank, and she closes her eyes again. Through the plastic of the oxygen mask, the corner of her mouth turns upward, as if she's trying to smile. I squeeze her hand and she grimaces. "I love you," I say. "Darling, darling sister, I love you so much." I clench my throat tight to hold back a sob trying to make its way out. My hand is in hers and she tries to lift it. I'm not sure if she wants to kiss my fingers. The effort is too much and her hand falls back. I lean forward and kiss her forehead. Maybe she wants to say something. I move the oxygen mask away from her face. She opens her mouth, but no sound comes out. She swallows and tries again, gasping for air. I lean forward to replace the mask, but she shakes her head. "JP," she whispers, and I feel my heart constrict. I thought she'd be happy to see me. Apparently the only person she wants next to her is her wife. "She's coming. She's parking the truck." She shakes her head with surprising vehemence and opens her eyes. They're no longer glazed or blank, only full of agitation. She's trying to get a sentence out, but it's barely a mumble, and there are only a couple of words I can catch. "JP, affair, Jim, JP had an affair with a guy called Jim. It's about the most unlikely thing she could tell me, and I wonder what drugs they have her on. I stroke her hand, her forehead, any part of her I can touch. Whatever happened, we don't need to talk about that now, honey. It doesn't matter. No, me. She gasps, then continues. JP, mad. Is this a deathbed confession? While I can't believe JP would have an affair with a guy, it's hard to imagine loyal, dependable Lizzie having an affair with anyone, female or male. Sweetheart, none of it matters. We're both here for you. We love you. She's parking the truck. She's not mad at you. Not now. Then. She sucks in all the air she can, then forces out a string of words, mumbling and incoherent. I told her, hell, and in the water, no energy, drink, Jim, but I wasn't. Lizzie, honey, I don't understand what you're trying to tell me. I'm sure it doesn't matter now. She's clearly exhausted, fighting for breath. I put the oxygen mask back over her nose and mouth. Did I hear her say the word hell? Is she saying she's going to hell? I know she gave up her faith, but now that she's dying, is she clinging to it? I wonder if there's a chaplain or pastor here. Even though Lizzie says she's no longer a Christian, she might want someone to pray with her and help her go home to God. I want to ask her, and yet she's already so upset and agitated, I don't want to make things worse. Does she understand how serious her condition is? Shall we pray together? I stroke her hand. With a strength I would never have expected, she rips the mask off her face. Ash! Her eyes, so empty a few moments ago, are burning fiercely. Yes, my sweet sister, She cuts me off. JP! I turn, thinking JP is by the door, has come in. She hasn't. Lizzie's eyes grow wide and frantic. Jim! Again, something I can't make out, and then a word that sounds like prison. Jim is in prison? She shakes her head and pushes out the word one more time. It still sounds like she's saying prison, yet I know it's not quite that. Her mouth moves, but nothing happens. All of a sudden, she slumps. Her eyes roll backwards, and all the machines she's attached to stop beeping frantically. The nurse yells, "Code blue," and there's a flurry of activity. I know it's too late. I've watched enough TV to know what it means when the machines show flat lines. Lizzie's chest is no longer rising and falling, and I can feel death in the air. Lizzie! I spin around. JP stands in the doorway, stunned. She rushes into the room, but Lizzie is now surrounded by medical professionals pumping on her chest, blowing some sort of balloon into her mouth, and JP can't get near her. There's silence while the medical team works on Lizzie, and I hear the words, "Time of death." JP looks around in bewilderment, chokes up and bursts into tears. She slides down onto the floor and I slide next to her. All I can think is that my sister is gone forever. I'm completely alone in the world. How can this have happened? How can my beloved sister, so healthy until last month, be dead? Lizzie's last words echo over and over in my brain. Jim, prison. All of a sudden, in the midst of my grief, the word comes unbidden into the forefront of my brain. Poison. She wasn't saying that Jim was in prison. With her dying breath, my sister was trying to tell me that someone named Jim had poisoned her.
Thank you, Alison, for lending me Devoted to read in preparation for this interview. I usually find books hanging out on my bedside table for weeks, if not months. I read your book in 4 days and was held in suspense, literally, from the first page to the last. A reviewer on your website shared the following, and I quote, "This is a whodunit of the highest caliber. I kept guessing, then changing my mind as the suspense escalated. The final chapter left me surprised and satisfied. This book teaches important life lessons about self-determination, love, loss, and trusting one's intuition. Highly recommended is not strong enough for this book," end quote. and I agree. So for a few questions, you describe the genre you write in as suspense. What is that exactly? What components make it different from, let's say, mystery?
So I think this whole question of genre is really interesting because, first of all, I don't think people would necessarily agree about what different things are. I just got an email from Amazon, because I now write suspense, of course I'm Googling a lot on Amazon, different suspense books, and so of course they're always sending me now. So they sent me this email about thrillers, and so I wrote it down because I couldn't remember. It said, and it had them all listed: historical thrillers, espionage thrillers, suspense thrillers, ghost thrillers, mystery thrillers, techno thrillers, romance thrillers, and then like I said, the suspense thrillers. So I'm like, okay, so why is a suspense thriller different from another kind of thriller? So I actually decided to look this up, and so one person said that the difference between a mystery and a suspense, and this one I like, is that in a mystery you don't know who done it, and in suspense you know who done it, you just don't know if they're going to get caught. And I thought, to some degree, I think that does somewhat summarize the difference between both of my books. And you don't know right away who done it, or if if in fact something happened. But once you realize that maybe there is, you then want to know, so what's going to happen? Where a mystery kind of, it's like Agatha Christie or whatever, you find out in that last chapter. The other thing I read is, mystery makes you think, suspense makes you sweat. So I like that term, suspense. And what I have, I've also heard the genre called domestic noir. The idea being that there's all kinds of different suspense and mystery, and a lot of it is, the whole world is gonna blow up unless our heroine, saves the world. And mine, of course, are nothing like that. It's more about, can I save the person next to me? Or, it's much more about relationships.
This book is about a woman struggling to some extent with her Christian faith, but you're Jewish. How is it for you to describe her character?
So I knew that I wanted to write about someone who was struggling with her faith, in terms of, I didn't want to have someone, a lot of lesbians have grown up in fairly radical or extreme religious backgrounds, and very often they just end up throwing it all out, because in this novel, Lizzie has thrown it all out. Once she comes out as a lesbian, she's done with Christianity. But I also know there are lots of people in the community who struggle with how do they reconcile their sexuality with their religious upbringing. And also, so many people have such positive feelings about their religion that they don't want to just let go of it. So I knew that I wanted to do something about that. And of course, it would have been much more familiar to do it about Judaism. But first of all, I thought it would be harder in terms of I have to do a lot more explaining along the way to average readers. And the other thing was, I also thought it was going to be harder because personally it's stuff that I'm still struggling with, whereas writing about Christian, I could get a little bit of distance from it. I did have a couple of beta readers look at it because I wanted to know, am I doing it right? And there are obviously differences between fundamentalist Christianity and Orthodox Judaism, which is what I grew up in. And so I needed to know what some of those differences are, and there is a chapter where two of the characters talk a little bit about that too.
Lizzie has FSGS, focal segmental glomerulosclerosis. I practiced that for like an hour. Was that something you knew about before? And if not, how do you research the information you need for your novels?
And that FSGS comes up fairly near the beginning. I was going to read a different portion, and as soon as I practiced reading it out loud, I realized there was no way that I could say focal segmental I've practiced it, Anyway, did I know about it? I didn't know about it. It is a certain kind of kidney disease, and actually I researched it partly because the crime that is committed in this novel is based on a true thing, and FSGS was part of that. So I learned more about medical stuff in my writing than I might want to.
Mhm. Your profession of clinical social worker, does it influence your characters?
I think it does. It certainly influences how I write about them. We were talking about this at a workshop that we were at, and I realized that when people write, when authors write novels, there tends to be two types of writers, and they're called either plotters or pansters. And plotters are people who have they figure out the whole outline before they ever start writing one word of a novel. They got to know exactly what's going to happen and how it's going to happen. And then there are pansters who have no idea what's going to happen, and as they write the novel, they find out. And I am absolutely 100% a panster. I cannot imagine working from an outline. But I also think that this is part of my professional upbringing because as a therapist, we meet our clients 1 hour at a time, once a week. And it takes us a long time to get to know them. And they surprise us along the way. So just when you think that you know someone, and usually it's right before you're about to go on vacation, and as you're leaving, they say, oh, you know, I did just want to tell you this before I go, and it's some absolutely massive bombshell that you're like, oh, thank you so much. Now I get to spend my whole vacation thinking about that bombshell. But I have really and truly discovered people keep secrets and they let them out very gradually, and so that's actually, and I know it sounds kind of silly to say this, but my characters do the same. I can't seem to find out about them until I've written and got to know them and found out who they are.
And I think dovetailing with your response to that, in both of your books, we find characters that have profound psychological issues, yet they love and lead everyday lives. Is there a message in that portrait?
Yes, I think that, obviously I think that people are really complicated, and I've known people, I used to work, I've worked a lot in violence against women, and not only have I worked with victims, but I've worked with abusers as well. And so one of the things that I know about people is that they can present one way on the surface and an entirely different way inside. But I also know that people who do bad things are not necessarily bad people. And that's what interests me a lot, is that you can't tell who's good or bad by looking at them or even just by interacting with them.
Where did you get the plot idea for this novel? Are there particular places like the beach, or the mountains, or the shower that bring you inspiration?
I will say, I think that the times I get the most sort of creative aha moments are either walking the dogs, lying in bed not being able to sleep, sometimes the shower. It doesn't. And the other side of that is that sometimes as I'm writing, stuff suddenly pops up, and I'm like, oh, look at that, that's what happens. Or I had to bag it, unfortunately. I had this whole thing happening in Devoted, which unfortunately I thought was much more intriguing than my beta readers did. But originally the character who's Ashley was called Ricky, and she wanted to liken herself to an animal that could overcome a slithery snake. And then I discovered Ricky Tikki Tavi. Anyway, it was this whole long, complicated thing, and I thought it was fascinating, and everything was coming together, and it was this total coincidence. And then people who read it were sort of like, yeah. so I guess I have to stick to getting my ideas when I'm walking the dog.
And you said Devoted in part in Gulfport. What made you decide to do that?
So I decided to bring Devoted to Gulfport, and I think in future I want to do more of my writing set in Gulfport. And that's for a couple of reasons. The first novel that I wrote, Along Came the Rain, is set sort of, it's also set locally, but it's fictionalized. I called it Jade County, but in my mind I was thinking of Pinellas County or Pasco County, that sort of area. And I thought, well, if I'm going to write about local areas, why don't I actually ground it in Gulfport, and that will be interesting to people who live in Gulfport. And the other piece of it is that it's very hard to, I mean, when you write about a location, you want it to be vivid. I would love to write about Israel, obviously, because I lived there for many years, but I don't feel like I could without going back there and remembering the sights and the sounds and the smells. And so there's a part of it that I set, so part of why I set it here is because then it's easy, because then I can, you know, have all those senses enacting at the same time.
Like your last novel, you wrote this one entirely in the present tense. Most novels are in the past tense. Will you always use this style?
I do like this style a lot. The other kinds of, when I read suspense novels, the ones I tend to like are often written in the present tense because it brings this sort of urgency to your writing. But I have to admit that I have already started another one and it is not in the present tense. There are readers who've said they struggle with present tense and that if they pick up a book that's in the present tense, they just don't want to read it. So I thought, all right, I'll give the past tense a shot.
And that's the next question. What are you working on now?
So I am working on, I'm not quite sure if it's going to be exactly suspense. I mean, I suppose it will be, but it is definitely set in Gulfport. It's going to be completely set in, as far as I know. Now I say it's going to be completely set in Gulfport, but then, you know, I don't know, maybe my character will run away and I'll have to follow her to somewhere else.
Sarasota.
It is sort of a very fascinating process because I have my characters. I've got 3 characters and I definitely want to follow them. Oh, and so the other thing is I'm bringing back Wynn from Along Came the Rain and Kat from Devoted. So I'm bringing in some of the characters from the previous novels. But beyond that, because I am a penster, I'm not actually sure where this novel will end up.
Where are your novels distributed? And how can we, as your supporters, help you?
So in terms of locally in Gulfport, right now Domain carries Along Came the Rain, and I think it will carry Devoted. Actually, they invited me to do the art walk for First Friday, and I'll be doing a reading there. But mostly, of course, most people, well, most local people, of course, are going to buy them directly from me. But in terms of those of you who only read on Kindles or Nooks or other digital devices, you can download them on Amazon or Smashwords. I just this morning was getting it set up on iBooks. I don't think it's quite there yet. And for those of you who like to order from lesbian outlets, it will be with Bella Books. It's just taking a little bit longer to go through that process. But like I say, if you're comfortable buying from Amazon, that's definitely the easiest place. And in terms of how people can help me, so first I would say, and I know that, you know, you're all fantastic supporters for me, and maybe not all of you even enjoy reading, you just are here to support me, and I totally appreciate that. But what I would say to those of you who are not readers, you probably know people who are, so you could definitely let them know about it, or you could even buy a gift for them. Probably the number one thing that's important is to write reviews. And I didn't realize that until I became an author, how important author reviews are. Especially in terms of Amazon, you know, when you buy something and it says people who bought this also bought this, those kinds of things are not, they've got all these complicated algorithms, and there's apparently a magic number that when you get 50 reviews, that's when they'll start to say people who bought this also bought Devoted, also bought Along Came the Rain. So even if you think, oh, well, I've got nothing new to say, these other people have said it, you know, like so far I have some fantastic reviews, and several people have said it's suspenseful and it's a whodunit, and so you might think, well, why would I bother repeat that? So yes, do repeat it. And not just for me, for any author that you read, reviews are really important.
I have some more questions, but I want to make sure there's plenty of time for your questions. Before we open up the floor, please, if anyone has already read Devoted, be careful not to give away any spoiler. It is easy to do. So please, any questions you may have for Alison?
Well, I'd just like to say that I did get Devoted, and Gulfport for a friend, and the friend hasn't reported back yet. The speech was due, but it was another, I must read this, and the pile that Bill has described on the night table. They're still there, and I finished devoted, and I found it an excellent book. I recommend it highly. It was exciting, and I love the suspense aspect of it. I kept wanting to go ahead and find it. You know, I always wanted to read the end, but I knew I would spoil it for me.
I'd just like to comment on what Molly said. The suspense, the story, the plot is, you know, brilliant, I think. It's unusual. And the writing, though, you know, is lovely. I mean, just there's a flow and there's beautiful use of language, and I just really appreciated that aspect as well.
Oh, I was just going to say that I really appreciate, I love that it's in Gulfport, because I love Gulfport and everything too. And since we play tennis together, I think your next book should have a revolve around the tennis.
And actually, because the book has, because Wynn is in it, and so Callie is also in it, and Callie's tennis exploits will be in there.
Oh.
I decided I also want to write about tennis. Yeah.
Anything else?
I was also gonna say, by the way, when you said about spoilers, so just adding on to the review thing, this happened a couple of times with Along Came the Rain, that people gave away the plot when they wrote the review. So I'll just remind you when you write a review to be careful how you do it.
Not a question either, but a comment. I love how you grab us so quickly in both books, and I picked up a couple books to try to read in between, and it's like, well, come on, you know, I'm reading chapter 2, chapter 3 before I get into it, and I appreciate that.
Thank you, I appreciate that, because with this one, I had originally started it in a different place, and I ended up starting it where I did, and I kept thinking, but I hope it gets people involved quickly, because I wasn't sure, and especially the next 2 chapters, I thought, are they a little too slow? But one of the things my editor said is that you have to trust your reader; they'll hang in there with you.
I thought you just had a beautiful flow with your language. My question is, was there an advantage to self-publishing?
So, good question. So the first novel that I published was with Sapphire Books, and they are a publisher out of California. And this novel, I went indie and decided to have my own publishing company and do it that way. And so it's been a very interesting process to see what the difference is. As someone who probably does have a few controlling tendencies, I will say that it is really nice to be in control of things, like how it's going to look on Amazon, like all kinds of things. I had more control over the cover. Like I say, if I want to change the blurb on Amazon, if I want to see how my sales are going, there's lots of very practical stuff that actually make it quite nice. The main difference is, of course, you have to do a lot more work yourself. You have to find the editor and make sure you find a good editor. And I did interview several editors before I decided who to go with. And you have to find a cover artist, and then you have to learn the whole process of how do I, get this on Smashwords, or I admit it, I've never even heard of Smashwords, but I'm learning. So there's definitely a learning curve. But it's, I went back and forth on whether I wanted to try to do it this way. I thought it was going to be so difficult and so complicated. And the other thing, but it really isn't. And the other thing I was concerned about is I know with Along Came the Rain, there were quite a few people who said to me, well, is it self-published or do you have a publisher? And as soon as I said, no, I have a publisher, it was like I went up in their estimation. And so I was definitely concerned that by being indie, I would sort of slip back down, but hopefully I won't. So.
Alison, what's the name of your publishing company?
My publishing company is called Wild Girl Press.
All right. Good question.
And I do believe my wife might have given me some inspiration.
As a self-published book, could a publishing company then still pick it up?
They could. Yeah, I mean, if a sort of major publishing company happened to somehow, okay, so that's how you can really help me. When you said, how can you help me? If you know people in the biz, pass the book along. And I'm very, seriously though, if you know people who are in the business, I'm very happy to give like free books to someone if it would, you know, get it in front of a certain audience.
I would like to say that in these days of erasure of lesbian lives in the world, I highly appreciate that you are tipping the scale the other way by having lesbian characters.
And what I will say is that I don't necessarily reach a large straight audience, probably just because of the circles I mix in. But I will say that it's, you know, the Along Came the Rain was very well received by whichever straight people did read it. In fact, shortly after it came out, I was approached by a book club here in Gulfport who said they'd like to read the book and would I join them for that evening, and I said sure. And I had no idea who it was, but of course I was picturing a bunch of, you know, older lesbians, and instead it was these young straight women. And it was really, and they all enjoyed it, and they all were fascinated by it, and so, you know, what I will say is I think that, you know, straight people are more than happy to read about gay lesbian characters. I think that, unfortunately, the major publishers don't necessarily recognize that. But.
Alison, I know you used a different editor this time, and we talked a little bit about how it was a different process for you. Can you say something about how it was different for you, and how you think it's kind of, I would say, infected, but impacted probably too? Your plot line, did it sort of change the process, and do you think that that made this a very different book from the previous book, aside from the plot?
A lot of questions in that one question.
I'm very good at subordinate clauses.
So when the last time we had the launch, I remember Susan Parker asking me a question about editing, and she said, did you have to do a whole bunch of rewriting for Along Came the Rain? And I said no. And the reason I didn't have to is because my editor, when I kept pushing her, she kept saying to me, you're such a good writer, there's just very little that needs changing. And while I found that very flattering, I don't honestly think it's entirely true, because I think the job of an editor is there's just always improvement that can be done. And so actually, doing the indie publishing, I felt like I had a better editor who just did more in terms of tightening it up. In terms of plot, so this time around, I started off with a couple of beta readers. And when I say beta readers, by the way, so beta readers are people who early on in the process are willing to read your book before it's anywhere near ready for publication to give you their feedback about the book and the plot. And so a couple of them, they both said the same thing. Originally, Ashley was a very homophobic character, and there was a lot of tension between her and JP, and it seemed to be because she was homophobic. And so they said, you know what, we have to deal with that enough in real life. We don't really want to read novels that have homophobic characters in them. And so I heard that and thought, okay, I got it. And the other thing was, they said, you know, we want to have characters we can root for. And I thought, yeah, of course, I don't like reading novels where I don't like the characters. So why did I do that? So my beta readers definitely helped me change the plot. And also the ending was totally different originally. I did kind of like it. It was a little spooky and a little different, but the majority ruled and said ending is not really working. And actually, I do think this new ending worked better. So, and the editor, so one of the things my new editor said is, you've got to tell us what the characters look like. So I am, as some of you may know, not a totally visual person. You know, if I come home and I say I met someone and Carol said, what'd she look like? I have no idea. I can't tell you what color her hair was, and I can't tell you if she wore glasses, and I just, you know, my most infamous example is that I used to work out at a gym. It was a dance class, and it was the same people every week. And one day I said to the woman next to me, oh, you look like you're losing weight. And she said, yes, I've lost 80 pounds. So this is why it's hard for me to describe appearances, because I I don't tend to notice them. And also when I'm reading, in my mind, either I know what the character looks like, or I don't necessarily care. And actually in suspense novels, a lot of times people don't really put a whole lot of detail in there. When my editor said to me, "You've got to tell us what she looks like," I went back and I looked at one of my favorite novels, The Girl on the Train, and I thought, we don't know, I'm reading through it, I'm like, we don't know what she looks like, who cares what she looks like, it's the plot that matters. And my editor said, okay, I'm someone that if I don't get given a visual, I stop reading the book, because I just need to know. So I accepted that, okay, I'm gonna have to describe how people look. And so comments like that are very helpful. And I don't remember in Along Came the Rain how much physical description there is of the characters, but I suspect there's not very much. Did that answer all your subordinate questions?
I'm dreaming of subordinate.
How do you get beta readers?
I'm part of an organization called GCLS, Golden Crown Literary Society, and that's an organization of both writers and readers of lesbian fiction and nonfiction. And so actually we have a list of people who are willing to be beta readers, and that's how I found 2 of my beta readers. And now at this point that I'm starting to have readers of my own, I also can turn to people who've already read my stuff. But it, like I say, for example, when I wanted to find a beta reader who had a background in Christianity, I went to our database in GCLS.
Any other questions? I just wanted to ask you, I know you've been on the road a bit, like in doing book signings and readings. And how is that for you? Is that exhausting or?
I enjoy it. Carol is laughing because we just did a book signing last week in San Diego. And as some of you might have seen on the news, San Diego had the worst flooding that it had had in many years, and more rain than our friends were saying, we don't ever remember it raining this much. So of course, when it came to the book signing, I was getting texts from people saying, I really want to be there, but we're flooded and I can't get out of where I live. And so that is not the first time it's happened. The same thing happened in New York. We had this massive rainstorm when I was due to do my reading. And even at that book club we had in Gulfport, just as I was about to start, it started absolutely pouring, and someone said, well, of course, look at the book title.
Good for you.
So I like book signings. That's another thing you can do for me. If any of you have contacts in other places, if any of you know of book clubs who are meeting, especially nowadays with Skype, I can participate in people's book clubs through Skyping or Google Talk or any of those things. And yes, I'm happy to travel and attend groups. Or also, if you know of events, like we just had Silver Threads here a couple of weeks ago, and that was a really nice event for a lesbian author to be at. So it wasn't obviously a literary event, but there were lots of women there that were very interested in reading. So if you know of other events like that you can let me know about, that would be great.
And I think for a book club, I thought this with Along Came the Rain, but and especially I think with Devoted for some reason, it just seems to me it lends itself really well for discussion, and learning. Because like the reviewer said, there's a lot of learning to be had about loss and love and surprise. So I want to thank Alison and Carol for the way they enrich our community. And also to thank you all again for sharing in this very special evening or afternoon. And please visit Alison at the book signing and enjoy.
Just want to make sure everybody's on the email list. It's back here if you didn't.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. And enjoy some refreshment and some schmoozing.
And we're gonna, if folks want to buy the books, then you'll buy them over there, and then I'm gonna set up a little table here, so if you'd like me to sign them, I will. And just to say thank you so much for coming, because Halfway through this afternoon, I was starting to get so worried about whether anyone would show up.
Oh, wow.